Good morning. Glad to be with you all this morning. I sure wish we were face to face. I believe a part of this brave new world that we're in is going to require us all to become a lot more familiar, comfortable, and proficient with online and virtual seminars, meetings, and learnings. And in fact, what I'm doing here today, the end of March, I did a version of this with a UTC class, an IO Psych, Industrial Organizational Psych class at UTC. And it was the first week UTC had gone online. And we had planned to do it, in person, but and it was good. They were still kind of figuring out. They were only a few days into the online bit, but it seemed to go very well. So I'm going to be get things going here. There, sorry, click didn't want to work. I'm going to be delving into the development process and developmental experiences, and I guarantee you what we're going through right now with the coronavirus and the pandemic and all the various impacts of it will be a powerful developmental experience for many people. Although for a large percentage, the real developmental learning probably won't come for some time. Later, when you can look back on it, when you have perspective and you're not in the thick of it, and that's somewhat the nature of developmental experiences. That the real meaning and essence comes out at a later point when you can, get that looking back kind of perspective. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me give you a bit of my background. This is where it started for me. I got my start in business with Celestial Seasonings. And it's in Boulder, Colorado. There were about 15 of us when I started. I was in production. I became the first production manager. And then when we got to about 50 employees, started the HR department. And then for 10 years, I ran the HR department until Kraft bought the company in 1985. And after that, I began consulting, worked with a executive ventures group. Again, this is still in Colorado. We taught characteristics of high-performing teams, doing team and leadership development, but with an outdoor element. So we had a ranch we worked out of with rock climbing, rappelling, and rafting that was included. And I missed that work at times. It was pretty amazing. Did that for about 7 years and then went on to Idea Champions, dedicated to innovation and creative thinking. And again, for about 7 years. And then in 2002, I went on my own. And that's roughly when I moved to Chattanooga as well. So how development works. By the way, this presentation is a slice from a day-long workshop on coaching and development that I helped create with a colleague of mine. I've designed this some years ago, and we've done many versions, mostly corporate, but replicated it many times. Usually, the attendees working on it they work on individual development plans, come out of the workshop with individual development plans. So a great way to learn about most anything is to personalize it. That is to bring it into your own realm, think about how it impacts you. And so that's how we're going to begin looking at development. So some of you, maybe all of you, how many do we have here? You have a number there? Trying to look. I don't see it. Anyway, however many the folks that are on, if you already got the worksheet, the developmental experiences worksheet, great. And some of you may have even thought about it or completed it. If so, that's fine. That's wonderful. But I'm guessing that most perhaps didn't and may not even have it. But the good news that the worksheet that Austin, I believe, sent out, everything that's on that worksheet is on the 2 slides. And it's very simple, and you can just work off the slides. So what I want you to do is think back over your whole career, jot down 2 or 3 of the most memorable or impactful developmental events and experiences you've had on or off the job, and at any point in your career where you learn things you still use to do your job better. Then from that, you'll pick one, and what did you learn from that experience? How have you used or applied those learnings over time and in new and different situations? All right. So hopefully everyone's got that, and you've got pen and paper. You can begin taking some notes. I am going to ask for some volunteers, and hopefully we'll, though we're more of a webinar setting, but I think that we'll be able to do that. So have that in mind for at least 3 or 4 of you to offer up what you come up with. Now, to get you warmed up and let you be thinking about it, let me give you a personal example. So I already related that some of the history at Celestial Seasonings, and during my 12 years there, the list of developmental experiences, lots of small things. I mean, we implemented an ESOP plan, we did gain sharing, we did some amazing innovative things that were really important in my growth and development. But interestingly enough, one of the most developmental experiences for me was leaving there. So when I left after those 12 years, and these were formative years, I joined when I was 23 to 35 years old. And really I was leaving the real career first job I'd had. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was kind of scary. But I learned, so the thing I learned from that was to trust my gut feeling. I'd really done the things that I wanted to do in terms of the formation and creation of all the programs and things there. And then I'd become an administrator. And I was like, I'm not sure I'm a great administrator. And so it seemed like that made sense to me. But so trust my gut feeling along with some calculated decision making. So that marriage, that concert was going to ultimately be the right move for me and serve me well. And then over time, that's played itself out. So leaving Executive Ventures Group after 7 years, moving on to Idea Champions, and then leaving Idea Champions to go on my own and simultaneously leave the mountains of Colorado outside of Boulder and come to Chattanooga, which I, no regrets whatsoever. That was, one of the best moves I ever made. So, all right, so I'm going to shut up for a moment and let you, and maybe you've been writing and getting some notes. And I'll just give you like 2 minutes. Interesting thing, when you're virtual, online, silence or quiet time is a whole different critter. So normally I do this in a live workshop, and I would see heads down and people writing on, on their worksheets, and have a good sense of how much time was needed and when the heads came up and when they stopped writing or typing, as the case may be. So we don't have that, and I'll just give another minute or so. It's really different. So the kind of silent time, it's like dead air on the radio, which is a no-no. Anyone in the radio, they hate that when that happens. And I can't ask for a show of hands if you're done or not, but at least hopefully some of you are. And so if we could get some volunteers, is Eric on to manage that, or Austin or Jeanette? Can you see?
If not, let me take a look.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
People can type it into the Q&A at the bottom.
Yes.
So
that's not working.
If you just want to continue, I can check with Eric, but go ahead and continue. And like I said, people can type their responses in the Q&A for the time being.
Okay. Yeah, so ultimately, let's see. Well, we may not be able to to get audience participation here. And so with that, I'll kind of recreate it. As I mentioned, I've run this probably, I never actually counted, but maybe 100, 120 times, and perhaps more. And so over time, and for a while I was tracking what I heard as people describe, their personal experiences. And there's certain things that begin to emerge. And generally, so when people are describing the way I did, leaving celestial seasonings, and what I learned from that, and then how I've applied that learning, is to have people listen closely, and then you begin to see patterns emerge and certain things in common with developmental experiences. Now, there are all different sizes of developmental experiences in terms of big ones. Sometimes when I do this, there are one or two things that just come up, boom, really important for people, as though, this, I didn't even have to think about it. This was such a strong developmental experience. And then there's others that, there are smaller ones, and they're smaller ones important too along the way, that help build to, your kind of ultimate development over time. And so what generally emerges are many of these elements. It was something I hadn't done before. I could have failed. I was missing something important, wasn't really ready, had to work with new people, put additional pressure on me. So typically there's a lot on the line. I could have failed, so it's the success failure thing, failure was a possibility, and it wasn't easy, wasn't a slam dunk. If I went back and looked at all the stories of what people had related, very few that were a slam dunk, that were easy. Typically, lots of about challenge and overcoming challenge, and that those are things that tend to stick with people, and where they're able to learn a lot from that. And oftentimes they were negative. They're the things that in the moment were bad, were difficult. First time I got, so the other part of it is the first time I got fired or laid off, first time I had to fire somebody, and what I went through with that. Any luck, Austin?
So I was going to say, Doug, there's a couple people that have typed in. So one person wrote, working as an adult felony probation officer.
Okay.
And then another one said, having to work closely with a very difficult personality during my first management role taught me to be more patient and look with other perspectives.
Great. Perfect.
And if people would like to talk, you should have at the bottom an opportunity to raise your hand, or on the side you may be able to raise your hand, and I can allow you to talk. I can give you that permission. So if you just put your hand up, I'll see it and I can do that. Or the chat is also opened if you wanted to type your answers in there and didn't want to actually speak.
Okay, and I can't see that though, can I? Should I be?
I can, but it looks like I have somebody that wants to talk. Do you want me to, is it okay if I allow them to talk?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Dee, you are on.
Hello,
And just say your name, what you do first, if that's all right.
my name is Dewan Jordan, and I am the Director of Business Support for Launch, and also a business and life coach.
Great.
I was just responding to what you said. Well, your question about the experiences. I was the one that put working as an adult probation officer. And the thing I learned from the experience is that everyone has a story, and that everyone makes mistakes, and that many of them weren't really different than me. The only difference was that I didn't get caught in a lot of situations. And also that change and transformation are two totally different things.
Great. Yeah, good example. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, that's cool. So first time experiences, just a little bit about that. When do we typically have those? So I ask questions all the time. I'm used to doing that. I'll answer them since, I'm not in a live place for you to answer. We generally have first-time experiences in our youth when we're young. It's just a simple fact that, we haven't done a lot of things, and it's when we first start to get out there that we have so many of those first-time experiences. First time we moved out on our own, our first jobs, first time, at a totally different culture and environment. Then as we move on in life and as we age, we get more experience. That's great stuff. We gain experience in certain fields, expertise. We get really good at some things. We know what we're doing, and both at work and our career, as well as hobbies and things that we do outside of work. And then what starts to happen? Well, we begin to have fewer first-time experiences. It's just a kind of a natural progression or evolution. And now, gaining experience is a great thing. All my years in HR, I was always looking for, experience as a criteria for hiring and talent and qualifications. But what can creep in is some complacency. We begin to rest on our laurels. Often we have to push ourselves to gain new and first-time experiences. We have to force ourselves, out of that comfort zone. In fact, frequently as we get older, it's not uncommon that the new experiences are thrust upon us. That is, they aren't something we asked for or that we planned on, right? But something happened to us, and then we had to deal with it. And often, not always, but often, can be some pretty rich learning that comes out of it. So, however, our development is something that we can spend time, on planning, as opposed to just letting it hit us. To think more planfully about, how to create developmental experiences. So a little bit more on the development process. We really tend to learn by doing. So assignments and work that we're actually involved in. People, mentors as another major part, and then courses. Hardship. There's so many of people's developmental experiences have involved some level of hardship or challenge, and that seems to be a regular component that shows up in developmental experiences. So generally, as we look at the doing things as a major portion of the developmental process, now you look at this and think, well, training, classroom reading is only 10%, but it's the real win is a mix. Is the kind of the magic is combining, as opposed to just taking a training class or just doing one thing. So if I'm trying to learn a new language, that, for me to not just do was a Babel or the Rosetta Stone, but also, find a place where I can volunteer to do translation, and find somebody that's fluent in that language and work with them, or, have them be a mentor. Go to restaurants that have the cuisine that go with that culture, that, and travel to the region of the country. So the more you can combine, the richer the ultimate experience and ultimately the development. I won't go through all these, but this gives you a bit of a sense of the kinds of things that show up typically. And if you think about what I said and what Dee said, that and if we'd heard more people, you can go through, and for each of you personally, go through and look at this list, and probably you can check off, 2 or 3, different things, like the elements that we looked at prior that were a part of it. Much of what I'm talking about is from this book, Lessons of Experience, the late 80s. These 3 folks, Morgan McCall, Michael Lombardo, Ann Morrison, were all part of CCL, Center for Creative Leadership. Michael Lombardo headed up the research and development department for CCL. Amazing book that really kind of stands alone in terms of a benchmark around the development process. And yes, it's how successful executives develop on the job, but ultimately it became much broader, not just, you know, executives in corporate America, but, you know, looking at the development process for people, and you know, what happens, what develops the most, and the, you know, the rich learning experiences, and putting people in new and different situations that forces them to really, you know, take on new behaviors and learn new things. So what develops, excuse me, this is in pretty much rank order. That is the greatest developers. Full-time jobs is really tends to be in the category of the most developmental because of longevity. So the fact that you're in a job and making decisions and solving problems and making mistakes, screwing up, having successes, all those things that go on that you then have to live with. Whereas part-time, long-term assignments, though, can be powerful, and many corporations use that now. There used to be, I know Procter & Gamble, a lot of the different consumer packaged goods, that you start off, you know, a young MBA, and you get dipped, was the term they use, where, you know, you got 2 months in sales and a couple months in marketing, and which is good to just learn about it, but not really developmental, because you don't have the time to stay with, to make decisions and do things and then live with them down the road. All right, so this is a part of, let's see, bear with me. Yeah, this is often overlooked. It's a really important part of the development process, and think of it as a personal debrief. Like a, you know, post-mortem, or Army calls it after action review, where you sit down, and it could be shortly after some event or experience, but sometimes it's over time, even years have passed before you have the perspective to look back on something and really call out, you know, what's in it for me. So what worked? What should I keep doing? What didn't work? What should I do differently? How can I apply what I learned to a new task? So learning chains, this is making sense of the experience. That is, we're extracting principles and rules of thumb out and then applying those in new and different situations. Another really critical and important part of development. So when I talked about leaving Celestial Seasonings, the principle for me was that trust my gut. And for me, in concert with calculated decision making, but not just trust my gut and not just calculated decision making. It was like marrying the two of those and allowing them to guide me when big things like that were coming up. Dee mentioned everyone has a story, and then there was more to that. I think everyone has a story, and then you had everyone. There were a couple of other things that I missed, but oftentimes these rules of thumb or principles are very simple. And when other people hear them, they're like, well, no, trust your gut, that's it. Yeah. But if you ask, I could fill a flip chart and take 20 or 30 minutes explaining and talking to you about what that trust my gut and calculated decision making means, and the nuances that go with that in relation to balancing the two, between trusting my gut and the calculated decision making. And I'm sure for D, you know, everyone has a story, or if we'd heard from more people, generally I'm able to jot down and reference 3, 4, 5 different things that that indeed were really the principles and rules of thumb that were extracted out, and then how you applied them, you know, over time. All right. So there's not really time for this, to do this, but I wanted to at least leave you with it. and this is future developmental experiences. So this is looking ahead to your career, career path, future expectations, and thinking about, you know, things that you purposefully could choose to do in order to gain, you know, some developmental experiences. And you know, what do I need to know more to learn more about gaining this experience? What can I do? What steps can I take to make the experience or event happen? How can I maximize the learning takeaways for myself? Let me give you an example, and this is a very current one. So contact tracing. I assume you've all heard of that now. It's kind of a big deal in trying to, you know, run down and figure out you know, the contacts that have been made and trace them. So if someone was interested in pursuing that, then what do I need to know? So I begin by exploring the qualifications, the expectations from info online. Just Google it and see who's hiring, who's doing that, and then better understand, what does it actually mean? What, I mean, if you are doing contact tracing, what does that involve? What are you doing? Is it all on the phone? How do, you know, so gaining an understanding of that. What can I do? What steps can I take to make this experience or event happen? Volunteer with Hamilton County Health Department, as an example, or any entity that is actually doing the contact tracing. And then how can I maximize the learning and takeaways for myself? Learn enough about being a contact tracer and actually doing the work for a period of time, whether it be volunteer or paid or both, so that I actually could become a trainer in contact tracing. So that example, very current. It's also happens to be personal. I'm actually doing this and have been in touch with the Hamilton County Department of Health to assist, because you know, it's something, it's kind of a give back to the community. It's something that's kind of up my alley in terms of the amount of interviewing and the kind of work I've done. So at any rate, that's something to leave you with, and hopefully some of you will use that in whatever way you can to be planful, you know, to think about developmental experience. It can be big deal things or small things in terms of picking some small chunks of things that you'd like to learn or get better at. All right, so I think I'm moving pretty close to the end of my time, correct? To allow some time for Q&A?
About 10 minutes left, I think, so.
10 minutes total, or?
Yes.
Okay. Let me leave you with this. It's Mark Twain quote. If there are any Mark Twain, I love Mark Twain and read him as a kid. But it's about experience. We should be careful to get out of an experience only the wisdom is in it, and stop there. Lest we be like the cat that sits down on a hot stove lid. She will never sit down on a hot stove lid again, and that as well. But she will never sit down on a cold one. So little humor, but also you have to think about that a moment in terms of what, but the point is really, how do we get out of the experience all that's in it for us? No more, no less. Back to the learning chains, in being able to extract out the principles and learn from them. I think we all know people in our lives, friends, family members, or colleagues that have a tendency to just keep doing things. It's like they make they're doing something and then they just keep doing it again. It's like, why can't they learn from that mistake and not keep doing the same thing over and over again? Or, the old definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So, all right, so back to Mark Twain. I'll leave you with that. And so we have a few minutes for Q&A.
So Doug, I don't know if you noticed in the chat, we actually had a comment. She said, I really like what you just said about the importance of allowing time to sit with it and live with decisions made. I've often coached young, ambitious employees who are looking to quickly advance and don't understand why they need a little seasoning. Thank you for that line of thought.
Okay, I'm just now finding these. That's great. Well, and I assume the audience, so that I mentioned the end of March, I did this with the graduate class at UTC, and they were all in their 20s mostly. And I assume young professionals, similarly 20s and 30s. And so this is really a time in your youth to these things are happening. When I look at in the corporate world and people in their 40s and 50s and 60s, you know, the experiences they were describing as the most developmental, many of them were back when they were in their 20s. We're going back 20 years and 30 years that were still very powerful for them when they stop and think about, you know, how it's kind of helped direct and affect the moves they made and the things that they did.
So we have a question on the chat. It says,
Okay.
how can we take the entire workshop on this topic?
Typically, as I mentioned earlier, it's part of a day-long workshop that's coaching and development. And it's generally about an hour. And so I kind of cut some things to get it down to the 30, 40 minutes for this session. But the answer is I don't know, other than so a lot of the work I've done has been customizing. So the coaching and development workshop, every time I've done it, it's been customized for a particular client. Though I, from that, have kind of got a generic version, but it is something that, I mean, I've never thought about doing a public workshop on it, but I suppose that's a possibility, or something I'd do with the chamber for that matter, and do it. I mean, probably be, you know, if we took more time with it, it'd be a couple of hours. But other than that, I don't know, other than, you know, get in touch with me. We'll see if we could, you know, create. I love it. This is something that, and I'm sorry that we've missed that. When 3, 4, 5, 6 people have related their personal experiences, there's kind of a momentum. There's, what's the word I want to, there's something about hearing people talk about things that were really important to them in their lives and their development. And so that's part of the power of it, that allows people to then look at the reflection part and the learning chains and personally, because you personalized it. Any other questions or thoughts?
Doug, you mentioned that this was part of a day-long workshop. Where is that offered? So that if people did want to even attend just this 1 hour part, even though it sounds like it's part of a greater session or greater day event, is there a place that they can go to find this information to register, or what does that look like?
Really, unfortunately, the same answer as I just gave. It's one that I've run. I've developed this with a colleague who's up in Columbus, Ohio, and we first developed it almost 20 years ago. And then really as we moved ahead to other companies in different settings, we kept customizing it. So whether, you know, initially, I mean, where I ran this the most was the chlorine manufacturer, you know, right here in Bradley County, that I did work with for a good, you know, 15 years, and really all of their supervisors and managers. And so we developed it with that in mind. It is something that, you know, it's fun work. I love it. But I've never actually put it together as a public offering, though it's something I guess I could consider. And again, whether I, you know, tried to do something with it, you know, that was chamber sponsored, chamber related, or did it on my own. But it's something that interests me. It's something that is built over time. You know, when you've done something a lot, as I was saying, in developmental experiences and learning, that there's a way that you can get good at it, and then rather than resting on my laurels with it, keep coming back and kind of ripping it apart. You know, say, wait a minute, okay, let's do some different things with it, and that I would do that at this point, and have done what we just went through, has gone through a lot of little, you know, iterations, variations to, keep it current. But we'll see if there is interest. I'm happy to try to pursue that. And in the coaching workshop, there's a lot of work around, as a supervisor, how do I not just manage but coach? And so it's really learning about coaching. And then the other part is on performance management. So we specifically with the company, performance appraisals don't really have a great reputation. And people are like, when performance review time comes. And so it was a part of that was trying to help the essence of the performance management is feedback. So the other part of the workshop, which goes well with the developmental experiences, is fit around feedback. So there's a section that's all about how to receive feedback and how to give feedback, because feedback is something that a lot of feedback that people get, it's not delivered very well, or it's delivered at the wrong time, or it's not done in a way that's really impactful, that someone listens to it and says, I know what I need to do differently based on that feedback and in terms of my behavior and what I do.
So Doug, I apologize. I'm going to interrupt you there with the question of, so you just mentioned all these great topics. So I'm just wondering, like, where can we find that information? That, like, where can we go to register for this event to attend that? Are you doing those like virtually at all, or is it just something in person? So it's on hold right now? Like, because you mentioned some really great topics.
Yeah.
If I actually wanted to go and attend this, do I go to your website to find the next dates of availability? Like, what? There's a disconnect, so I'm trying to understand where.
I've not been running it
Okay.
in a public setting. So the only place I've done it, without going through the cheese company in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the chemical company locally, and then, a company up in Columbus, Ohio. So it's been specific companies, and with the emphasis being to come in, take kind of the basic workshop, and then do the customization. So typically we'd have case studies that we'd include, and we'd make the case studies very specific to that company. And that's been very powerful that way. But that
company books you.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so not personal, but more companies itself.
Right.
So
But
if a company wanted to reach out to you, would they go to your website?
yes.
Okay.
Yep, to the website, or just contact me. My email information. That would be great. I'd be happy to talk to them about it. And just as by virtue of this discussion, it's something that I'd have to think about investing the time to try to put it into a public format. But that would be fun to do. I'd be up for doing that. So, but right now there's not a place where you can actually go register or sign up for it. Because as I said, I've never run it in a public fashion or public format. But if there's interest, yeah, I'll do it. In fact, it'd be really fun. My colleague up in Columbus, Ohio, would be even more fun to do it with her. We've worked together for 20 years, and when we kind of tag team on things, it's kind of a marriage of different background skills and presentation style. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for that great presentation. And remember, if anyone has any other questions, you can just put them in the chat at the bottom.
Okay.
And our next speaker will be on in a few minutes, so everyone just hold tight and we'll be back.
And if anyone has questions or things they want to follow up with, I assume, do all the participants have contact info for each one of the speakers?
They don't now, but they will later. Thank you, Doug.
Okay, great. All right. Well, good work on setting this up virtually, and hope the rest of the day goes great. I'm sure it will. And it's been a pleasure.